So that's what we're trying to do, is to create, instead of a one-to-many, which is how traditional venture works, right? You have the GP who sits on the board or helps the company. We've tried to create something we call many-to-many, where you have this large community of founders and operators all at early stages that are trying to support the next generation of builders.
Welcome to Venture Voices, where we interview emerging managers within the venture ecosystem. I'm Richard Kerby, a partner at Eco Ventures, and today we have the pleasure of having Jenny Fielding from Everywhere Ventures. Jenny, welcome.
Hi, excited to be here.
Oh, thanks again, Jenny. And I guess, we'll start from, everywhere. How did Everywhere Ventures get started in the first place?
Yeah, so like many many things in my career, I've kind of eased into it, dipping my toe in before going full speed. So I actually spent almost 8 years as a managing director at Techstars. And while I was there, I was noticing, early days, 2014, 15, 16, that a lot of my companies were looking to raise capital, but they didn't need these kind of big seed rounds yet, or they weren't ready for them, like, 2, 3, 4 million, $5 million seeds. What they really needed was like a bunch of, people that could roll up their sleeves and, give feedback. And just provide a community. And those rounds were pretty small, oftentimes 500, 750, 1.5 million. And so, the kind of thesis for our fund was, what if we can create a community of founders and operators, who are many of them angels themselves, who could, provide deal flow, access, diligence to the founders that they were seeing in whatever geographies they were. So that was kind of the origin. And I started it while I had a full-time job. So it was a nights and weekends gig for many years, actually, for more than, I think, 3.5 years. And then my side hustle became my full hustle. So you know how that is.
Indeed, that's helpful context there. And I guess also helps with the full-time hustle was also relevant to the side hustle. But, one thing that, I think is fascinating is, when I initially, you mentioned what you were working on, it was the fund. Everywhere used to be called that. And so what prompted the name change, and, why did you choose to go with the word everywhere?
Yeah. So I think when we started the fund, there were a few reasons. One was I had a full-time job, so I think we kind of wanted to keep it a little bit quiet. But then it became its own kind of funny, cult of personality. Wait, what fund? The fund. So we kind of loved that kind of play on words and how funny it was. When Scott, my co-founder, and I decided to go full-time, we kind of looked around and we're like, okay, what are really like, what do we represent? What are our values and what are our ambitions? And one of the things that we, got into very early on was investing globally. And the reason that we were able to do that is because, again, our LPs, the people that give us money, are founders and operators, and these people are located around the world. So we were seeing from their networks really interesting deal flow coming from places like Nigeria, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, all these amazing places. And so we started investing in those companies because that's where our communities were. And, this was a little bit unique for two people that were living in New York. Scott's now in LA, but like, why are you guys investing in places as far as Africa? But we kind of built a thesis around this idea that innovation is everywhere and we want to be where the best founders are, and we don't really care where that is. And so we started doing that a number of years ago. And then obviously with COVID, that just got accelerated because, you probably saw this as well. There might be one founder in New York, but there might be one founder in Bali and one founder in Mexico City. And like, okay, where is that company based, right? Like these companies really went global pretty quickly. And location became somewhat obsolete. So as we thought about, what we represented, it really was this idea of founders building companies where they wanted to build them. And that actually may change, but it may not be in New York City.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think COVID definitely accelerated that whole process of folks, realizing they could work wherever they want and run their companies elsewhere as well, and remote teams. And so, TBD how it will always be, but I think we're pretty locked in, at least from a hybrid perspective, if not, fully remote. And so definitely get that standpoint on and everywhere. And I guess, most venture firms don't like go through necessarily like full rebrand of a name. So like, what did you learn from that process?
I mean, we had been the fund for, I think, 4 years, so it was hard, especially because our limited partners, again, the people that give us money are founders and operators. And I would say the vast majority had, this identity as like on their LinkedIn and like all these other places, right? Because they're not institutions, and many of them were really part of our community. And so it's like, can you imagine going to like 500 people and being like, okay, by the way, like you're going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be a new icon on your LinkedIn. Don't get freaked out. So I think it sounded like a good idea, but then when we actually had to execute, it was much more complicated, than we thought. Luckily, one of the folks that's our LPs, they actually run a really cool creative agency, and they're called Factory. They're based in Brooklyn, and they really helped us kind of understand the magnitude of changing. They helped us actually kind of come up with the name, and they helped us execute it in a way where we hope that people in our community, both the founders that we've invested in and the founders that invested us, felt good about the evolution. And we were actually quite nervous about it, and we had nothing but great responses from externally, internally. So it was pretty great.
Yeah. Well, the name I love, and I think it fits and exudes what you guys are. You're investing globally, your founders are everywhere, your LP base is everywhere. And so it's a very fitting name, and the URL worked for you too. And so it's always a kicker.
Yeah, it was funny last week, as I mentioned, I was in Kenya for the Kaufman Summit, and my co-founder Scott was in Singapore. He's a Milken fellow, and we were like talking, and we were like, okay, this is kind of crazy. Like, I'm in Africa, you're in Asia, and like we're running this fund and looking at companies locally, building communities there. But we kind of both had this moment when we were on our WhatsApp of being like, wow, this is kind of awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, just saying that you guys are on WhatsApp also blends with the Edward mentality, because obviously it's used much more external than the United States these days.
We are like 100% WhatsApp at our fund. Like we don't even text anymore anyone. We're all WhatsApp all the time. Um,
Love it, love it. And there's obviously many aspects to investing in venture ready stages, from pre-seed, seed, series A, B, and beyond. Obviously everywhere you do a bunch of pre-seed. And so just curious for the audience, what are those unique challenges that you see that the pre-seed founder in particular needs help to be solved with versus, the seed or series A founder?
I mean, so much. These are mostly folks with, ideas and dreams and, maybe a little bit of code. So, a lot of folks or a lot of investors, like to say they invest in the earliest stages of company journeys. And, the truth is maybe if it's a second time founder, they've already proved that they can execute, or, they've known the person for very long. There's not that many like pure pre-seed funds. And it's because it's like hard to stomach. Like we know going in that something like 70 or 80% of our companies are not going to make it, right? And that's like that's a really large number. And so it's kind of funny sometimes when we talk to LPs and they like ask us about the loss ratio in our fund one. We're like, actually, it's not high enough. And like the LPs who know, right, the seasoned LPs are like, oh, interesting. And the ones that haven't been investing in super early stage long enough are like so confused when I say that, right? So, most of these companies aren't going to work out. So, we're kind of looking for a few characteristics of the founders versus the industry or some thesis that we have. And the big one that we've really seen come to play, obviously, in the last 18 months is this idea of resilience. So we're really looking, to find those founders that can go the distance, that can get through hard times like the one that we're in now, and persevere to the other side. And, I've had companies run out of money. I've had companies, kind of all crazy things happen, founders leave. And if they can get to the other side, some of those can actually be, incredible breakouts. And I've seen that in my portfolio. So I'd say resilience, like number one. Number two, what we look for is really this idea of being data driven. So we call these the fast founders, right? Where they see something happening in the business, they're looking at the numbers like every second, and they are very, responsive to that and pivot and or change direction or respond to that quite quickly, as opposed to, okay, this is something going on, we're going to watch it. We find at the early stage those fast founders that are being very responsive to the data points in their business are the ones that can kind of make it to the seed. So I'd say we look for that. And then I think the last is because we're not focused really on specific verticals, although I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of some of the areas that we're interested in. We're actually looking to the founders to have a unique insight on a market. So like, I'm not going to know anything about that market, or not a lot. So we're looking for those founders who have a unique insight, about a world that they think is coming, right? And so if that's, when we made climate bets in 2018, and like these founders were saying like, hey, like this is where things are going, where everyone else was like, oh, I don't know. Or healthcare, or some of these other areas. So we want those founders they don't have to come from that area, but have a unique experience that has given them an insight into an industry, and be able to, really convey that in a compelling way. And that's an exciting founder. So I'd say at the early stage, we're really looking at founder characteristics, and those are some of the ones we focus on.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I know you alluded to climate right there. And, for those who are watching and will be listening, Jenny and I are currently hiding from a monsoon outside right now, as it just is pouring all over New York City with everything flooded. And so definitely climate related things happening all around us at all times. And yeah.
And to speak of that was one of our early climate bets, was this company called Forerunner. It used to be called Forerunner Flood, essentially helping municipalities with their kind of flooding, their flooding plans. And when we invested in that, people were like, I don't know, selling to municipalities sounds hard, and how big is this, and the like. And so, what was great about JT is like he told the story of where he thought things were going. And we were like, well, it's 2018. We're like, that's news to us, but like, wow, he's really thought this through. And some of his experiences previously are, informing where this company is going. So that company has, gone on to raise nice rounds, and yeah, we're excited about them. But that's a good example of an industry we didn't really know much about, but the founder just had this unique insight.
Yeah, and I remember being intro to that one. I think maybe even from you, and clearly made the wrong choice on the pass there. And so kudos to you. And I know that the Gutter Capital team, I think, is also in that one. They're one of our previous guests in the show. And so awesome to see folks in the podcast collaborating together. And then I know they've raised a Series A. I'm not going to say it because I'm not sure if it's announced yet, but also by someone else that we enjoy working with. And so that's good to know as well, as they continue to progress there. And yeah, I guess, when I think of pre-seed, I almost think of like, hey, nothing is too early from a business formation standpoint. So curious is, are there things that are too early? Are there concepts, team structures, or things you're like, you know what, we are early, we do pre-seed, but we just don't do this? Just curious on that respect as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of too early, that's really code for not that interested. So that's what I always tell founders. I mean, most of us, if we see something, that we just are super excited about, like we don't care if it's too early, too late, we're going to chase it, right? So oftentimes that's like, we're not interested enough at this moment, and that can change, right? And so I always say to founders, like, stay in touch, and let's see how things develop. I think that goes back to some of the characteristics I mentioned, like resilience, and these, it's hard to like have one call with a founder and say like, oh yeah, resilience, I can check that box. So oftentimes we like to kind of follow founders over their journey. Sometimes that can be a few days, that can be a few weeks, and that can be a few years, right? And so we have companies that have kept in touch over long periods of time, and we've ultimately invested. So the too early thing I just like to point out to the founders listening is kind of a soft way of saying just not that interested today.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And then you kind of mentioned this too. Prior to Everywhere, you were, the managing director of Techstars New York, and I think through that process, you probably worked with and mentored, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of companies. And so, what were the kind of learnings from that experience for you that you've taken into Everywhere, and some things you left behind as well?
Yeah, so a lot of inspiration from the Techstars network. I think the thing that I really learned was how to synthesize information quickly to make fast decisions. So, at Techstars, I was reviewing thousands and thousands of applications a year, and I was meeting thousands of founders, and I had to kind of quickly be able to triangulate. Now, again, not being an expert in any of these areas, what I did was use the Techstars network and then my greater network to help diligence these, right? So very quickly, if there's a company, in telemedicine, like I had 50 people that were mentors in the program, people that I knew that I could kind of quickly send something out and get a directional feedback of, is this interesting? What are the questions to ask, right? So what I really learned at Techstars was like how to, mobilize this kind of large community, this large network to help me be a better investor. And so in building everywhere, we have 500 founders and operators that are all LPs. They're across a spectrum of areas. And so, as I'm getting literally hundreds of deals sent to me a week, I'm able to process them quickly because I have, these segmented groups like very well defined that I can quickly reach out to for directional feedback on these founders, on these areas that helps me move more quickly. So I'd say that was one of the big learnings. And then, the second one is that at the earliest stages, like, cash, as we know, is nice for founders, but what they really need is community and resources. So we've tried to build a platform for our founders that is, as good as all the best accelerators out there, whether it comes to people that can help them, the perks that we're able to offer, and really kind of the scalable platform that we have for our founders where they're interacting on our Slack channel, at our events, through our CRM. We've tried to kind of build that out to have a more kind of self-serve platform.
Yeah. No, I love the aspect of just like community in general. And for you, it's not just community here, but it's obviously community globally. And so I imagine there's learnings from the LP base for the founders that are applicable across geos and countries and that you've seen. And so are any examples there that are worthwhile sharing? Because I imagine there's got to be lots of overlap from geo to geo and from, operator to operator on the LP front.
Yeah, I mean, what's really cool is that we've actually backed companies that are really pursuing similar go-to-markets and even products in different geographies. And we've connected them up to say like, hey, you're the folks doing this kind of in Australia. And you potentially are going to go into Asia. These are the folks doing it in the US. And like, we've backed you both. And so it's pretty cool to kind of have something that we think is working in one ecosystem and then support founders in other ones. So I'd say that's one of the ways. The other way is just simply around, kind of access. So we've invested in about a dozen companies in Africa. We had one announced yesterday, their seed round led by QED. And so that's like exciting for us to help these founders bring international investors to them, right? And so I think that's another way that, we can kind of connect the dots is like, you might be running a company in Africa, but there's probably capital, here and, in other locations. And so how can we kind of connect the dots amongst that community? So that's one of the things that we really enjoy, and it's actually just not that hard, right? Because we kind of have everyone very streamlined, interacting all the time, and so we can we can make those connections more easily, whether it's to founders building similar things who can share learnings, founders that are maybe like 18 months or 2 years ahead of them, and or capital.
Yeah, no, I think that whole community you're describing seems like just a great way to add value to founders beyond the capital, as you mentioned, given how early there that there's a lot more to do than just capital. And so I'm glad that you guys are all supporting your founders in that standpoint. And yeah, I guess we just kind of went back into like a previous life of Jenny in the sense of, Techstars, maybe even going back further, at one point you were a lawyer. And so, what prompted you to leave the legal world in general?
Well, that I was a lawyer might be a bit of a stretch. I did graduate law school and I did, I guess, work as a lawyer, but it feels like so many careers ago. But I had a very kind of traditional early start, worked in law, worked at JP Morgan, and then I became a founder. So while I was working at JP Morgan, I actually founded a company. So again, here's the theme, the side hustle becomes the main hustle. So my nights and weekends, I started my first company in 2007. And again, like I had this like my day job, I literally wore a suit and like live that whole New York life. And then I'd like come home. My co-founders would like work in my apartment in my living room, like take off my suit, put on my hoodie, and like work the rest of the night. And that was like my life for a while. So very funny. But the truth is, once I kind of, saw tech, which was like pretty late actually. New York in that time just wasn't like this kind of echelon of like incredible, technology. Most of my friends, from Columbia were, I don't know, working at McKinsey or like, being much more professionalized. And so like entrepreneurship was just, it wasn't all around like maybe it is now. And yeah, once I got a taste for both entrepreneurship and kind of, working for myself, building products and, technological innovation, I just was never going back. So started my first company in 2007, my second company, and yeah, kind of the rest is history. Ended up kind of shifting to the other side, to the dark side of investing. But building a firm, as you know, is very much like running a startup. So I feel like I'm back in the trenches of building.
Yeah, well, hopefully we provide more light than dark to our founders while being on the dark side. But that's helpful context there. And you mentioned before too, everywhere generalist firm invests across many different categories. I guess two questions there. Are there certain things in particular you're looking for now? And then on the flip side, are there certain categories that are just no goes for the Edward team?
Yeah. So we have a very large portfolio, about 260 companies. But when we were going out to raise our fund three, we were like, we had been, super generalists. And again, our thesis was that the founders and operators who are in our network are seeing great stuff, and we should look at all the things that they're seeing. And if you have a diversified LP base, you'd get a diversified portfolio. And so that proved true. And our fund one, I say, is very much diversified across categories. We kind of took a step back and we're like, all right, let's look at where some of the outliers are coming from. And we, crunched our own data. And lo and behold, there are areas that my co-founder and I have spent a lot of time in and kind of have built a track record in. And so we came up with this kind of funny name called the table stakes economy, which is really like, what are table stakes to live? And so we think that's money, health, and work. And those are very broad categories, and you can fit a lot into them. But broadly speaking, fintech in the money bucket, but really broad. I mean, everything from what you'd think of fintech to e-commerce enablement and any kind of any transfer of payments or of goods or of anything commerce in that like we'll look at. Health, because we think like there just needs to be so much more innovation and change in that way. But really, I mean, if you've had any kind of health challenges in your life, it's very hard to live a thriving life if you're feeling like shit, right? And so we want to be, putting our dollars in those areas. It's mostly digital health, telemedicine, etc. But new ways for people to access care. And then the last bucket that we've been investing in, for a long time is, future of work. So new modalities of working, vertical SaaS, automation developer tools. So those are areas that we like. Again, very broad. And so if it's something like climate, we're like, that comes for us under health, right? You can't have, you can't be healthy if you can't breathe the air. So yeah, it is rather broad, but it helps us kind of define what is an everywhere or not portfolio company. I think the things that we won't really look at, we're not doing hardware, we're not doing kind of consumer social. I'd say we're not doing consumer products either, like no CPG, biotech, kind of out of scope. And a lot of it is that, again, our network can't really support that. So we don't really have, experts who can be useful. We're not getting necessarily the best deal flow. Although we do get deal flow, I wouldn't say it's, kind of the top deal flow. So we want to stay kind of where our networks are already built.
No, that makes a ton of sense there. And maybe just diving into just process it everywhere. How does the deal get done everywhere? Is it like a voting threshold? Is it just individual GP conviction? What's that process look like for you internally?
Yeah, so we have a cool structure where we've got about 30 venture partners who help us located around the world. And so those folks help us kind of source diligence and invest in companies. We're conviction driven. So, we want someone to be pounding the table saying this is, the best deal. I'm excited. I'm putting my money, my time, everything behind it. And so we're not looking for consensus driven investing, so just conviction. So I guess, that's one way. So not really voting. We are looking for people who yell and pound the table.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, there's always, opportunities where someone spent more time than the other person or the people on a deal. And so they're going to have a better viewpoint on the founder, the opportunity. And so that conviction makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think the truth is Scott and we're lucky we've worked together for more than 5 years. We've known each other for a long time. And I think we just have a really great, deep respect of each other. And if he's so super excited about something and he's like, we have to do this deal, and I see that excitement in his eye, and even if I don't see it, that's a deal that we're going to do. We do have a no asshole policy, so either one can officially veto a deal if we feel like this is not someone that is going to be kind of reputable and a good steward of our community. And yeah, I mean, it's like we very very rarely use that or that ever comes up, but once in a while it actually does, and it's important just to have those conversations of like, you know what, I just got a bad vibe from that person based on that call. I didn't like the way that he did X, Y, and Z. And then we walk away from the deal. We feel totally good about it. We never get upset about that because that's just not the firm mentality that we've built. Like, we want to be investing in great people that we both feel good about. And that's great. And I'm totally happy to walk away from a deal I've spent a lot of time working on, or someone that, I think could make a lot of money, because I don't feel like that fits, or because we don't feel like that fits within what Everywhere is about. I'll feel great about that.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think the founders listening to it are going to get a good sense of how things operate within Everywhere. And I guess, like, maybe sticking along this theme here, um, how should we think about the value add effectively everywhere? Everyone's wondering, how do venture firms differentiate? I think it's a really hard question to answer from like the LP standpoint, at least the way I think about it. And so I'd love to get it, since I think, you've alluded to some of the answers here around community and the ability to kind of really add value beyond the capital, but I'd love to just hear how you kind of portray it to founders and then maybe as LPs, if there are any examples of how that community within Everywhere has really helped your founders succeed and scale.
Yeah, so it's actually funny when we raise money from LPs and they're like, okay, you have so many portfolio companies, give us a list of who to call. We're like, here's a list of everyone, just call anyone. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And we're like, you can call anyone. They'll basically tell you the same thing, right? We've built a platform that is very self-serve. And so there are founders that lean in more, founders that don't, but we've built a really robust, again, set of tools and resources for these founders. And there's some that just are like right in there and taking advantage of everything, and some that are kind of on their journey. But again, we have 500 founder LPs. We don't really make such a distinction between who's a portfolio company and who's, a founder LP. We have events that are happening once a week, like so crazy. Like, I hosted an event this week in DC. Scott hosted an event in the Philippines this week. I hosted an event in London last week. I mean, it's once a week we have something going on. Next week I'll be in Boston. So there's always like these great opportunities to interact IRL. I mentioned like our Slack channel, which I think crossed 900,000 messages exchanged between this group of now about 700 founders and operators that are all LPs or portfolio companies. And so, yeah, just some of the stuff that we've built out is our value add. we don't run around, talking about it. I think we just feel it from founders. Like they'll, call me and be like, oh gosh, you guys were so helpful about, this. And I'll call Scott. I'll be like, did you talk to that founder? He'll say, no, I didn't. And so what that means is someone in the community, lent a hand, helped them with something, connect with someone, gave feedback on something. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to create, instead of a one to many, which is how traditional venture works, right? You have the GP who, sits on the board or helps the company. We've tried to create something we call many to many, where you have this large community of founders and operators all at early stages that are trying to support the next generation of builders.
No, that makes sense. And it's amazing how you can have had a meaningful impact on a founder and have no idea that it was you, your partner, or a venture partner.
Right. I mean, it was someone in the community, but
Yeah.
we kind of get the credit.
Yeah. Well, I think it also just extends the everywhere brand and the capability to be helpful to founders. And so that's fantastic because, you can only do so much as a GP of two effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I had breakfast with a Series A investor who told me that she sits on 17 boards. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's really intense. So, yeah, we kind of take the opposite approach. Is like, I will never sit on a board. We really are there to play support, and we love it, and because we're able to, syndicate and play well with everyone. We have a lot of friends, which is friends who are investors, which is nice.
No, I think collaboration is awesome, particularly at the pre-seed and seed stage. And yeah, I guess like thinking through founders and operators, generally speaking, I think we both know that companies have major setbacks, major failures, but it doesn't always mean that those companies are going to go to shit or go to zero every single time. And so it'd be great to just hear a story about, one of your portfolio companies that has had, major setbacks, major obstacles, had to deal with them, but then otherwise came out great and were able to succeed and scale and keep pushing forward there.
Yeah, in some of the areas that we invest in, there's like a lot of regulatory hurdles, right? So in fintech, healthcare, and so I call it, the trough of despair, which is usually things start out cool, like it has this, it's very buzzy. Maybe they get a little bit of momentum, and then there's this moment, right? They might be selling into a healthcare provider or a bank or something, and all of a sudden there's this just terrible moment of like, wow, this could take 2 years. So I have a company that's actually called Alloy. So they're a unicorn now. Great founders, loved. They had a unique insight on the market. They really showed their kind of resilience. So perfect Jenny investment, building in fintech, a space that they'd known about. And they ran out of money. So the sales cycles were super long. They were selling into, other financial institutions. They just flat out ran out of money at the seed. And so that company, there were other stories too of that company, like basically almost dying. And these founders were just, they would not give up. They're some of the most resilient people. I mean, even when they went down to no salaries to, having to lay people off, I mean, they kind of went through it all. But if you can break through, one of the reasons I like regulated industries is if you can break through, then you are like miles ahead of everyone else. And now Alloy is pretty much considered the leading in KYC in the fintech space, and they're kind of far from anyone else who would want to catch up. There were very hard years at the early stage. So yeah, I think founders just need to find something that they are very passionate about, as opposed to like, oh, AI is the next thing, I'm going to capitalize on it, because I'm not sure that's going to get you through the moments where you need to do layoffs, where you're not taking a salary, where you're literally sleeping in the office. And I saw all of that with a number of my companies that are doing great now. So you got to just find something that is going to get you out of bed in the morning, even in really crap times.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I had literally just met the Alloy CFO on Tuesday, Kieran, and it was interesting to see the kind of just the evolution of that business you mentioned. I think, fraud prevention is something that's never going to go away. In fact, it just may be increasing in need and demand. And so I think there's got a lot of real runway for them in that respect. And, if you can prevent fraud, banks and fintechs will be your best friends. And so hopefully they can
Yeah.
keep barking up the right tree there.
Yeah, but I mean, there are three co-founders, like young co-founders, like trying to sell into financial institutions in 2000, 15, 16, 17. It was just a slog. Those sales cycles were awful, and yeah, you just had to get through. So yeah, excited about them and what they've accomplished.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point there, which is that like it just takes a while to build these really significant businesses. Like the overnight story, I think is like just incredibly rare. But you don't have to have that overnight story to build, a business with great enterprise value that is rewarding for all founders, employees, investors, et cetera. And so that to me is the norm. And so it doesn't surprise that's the case for them or any other company.
Especially at the pre-seed. I mean, we're so early that, whenever I talk to Series A folks, I'm like, oh yeah, these companies been grinding for 4 years before they even gotten, to you. So yeah, it is a long journey, but
Yeah, and now you kind of switch to the point on the long journey for the investors, which is obviously the case for us at seed, even for you at pre-seed. And so, how do you think about that? I guess management of money for you all in terms of liquidity, seeking secondary, other things. What's the kind of framework for you all in that respect?
we're going through this right now on a potential secondary. Um, our so a few things. One, I was kind of trained at Techstars by some folks that have been around way longer than I was to not be stupid and return capital just because like you see a lot of potential. And so I've been someone, through my Techstars portfolio who's been able to do secondaries over the last few years. And a lot of people kind of looked down on what I was doing actually in kind of like the real rah-rah days of 2020 through 2022 in some of my winners. Like, why would you take money off the table? They have so much more to go. And for me, it was less about trying to time the market. It was more about being a good steward of capital, right? And in the same way that like I believe in Bitcoin, but I don't try to time the market. Like I dollar cost in, and I want exposure to these things. I think it's good hygiene to do that the other way. So I've always been someone that kind of believed in that, but it was hard because I got a lot of pressure like not to do it. 2020, 2021, like literally people told me that I was out of my mind. So that that kind of worked out well. On the flip side, you don't want to be kind of pressured if you think that these are great companies. So I think it's a balance. We're lucky in that our capital comes from founders and operators who've been through the journey. And so, there's, of course, high net worth individuals love getting cash back. But I think that it's a little bit different than if you're a large institution that literally cannot make a new investment or, invest in a new manager or something if they don't have cash come back. This is like, something different with high net worth. So I can't really comment on, how institutions look at it, but I will say that, we do take money off the table when it hits a certain threshold. We've kind of made a framework for that and have stuck by it. And, we review it all the time, but I've learned from folks who've seen other ups and down cycles. Just that's a good way to think about it. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think just having like a framework or process in place will just help you make, I do the best decision when the opportunity presents itself, rather than kind of having an ad hoc approach and not knowing what to do when it comes, because that price point may come and go, and the bid ask spreads on those secondaries can change very quickly, as we've seen now in this market.
Yeah, and you get a lot of pressure. Like I had a really great crypto company, and when things were just so up, people were, I mean, the amount of inbound I got from, all the secondary players, from the insiders, from, people that wanted this, and yeah, and then people saying, "Why on earth would you ever sell?" So I think it's more complicated than people think, and it's hard, as a manager not to get swayed by what's happening in the markets. But I think, thinking about it a little bit more systematically over like, okay, this is a 10-year journey. When they hit certain milestones, like that's a good time, regardless of what the market is doing. So.
No, I concur there. And yeah, maybe jumping back into the everywhere portfolio, it'd be great to hear about, a more recent investment that you made, and what got you to say yes.
Okay, well, I'll go back to the one that I mentioned in South Africa because they just announced their new round. So that's a company called Revio, and they're a subscription billing and back office payments platform. and they're, focused on solving the crisis of failed payments in Africa. So, believe it or not, 3 out of every 10 payments in Africa fail. Just as digital payments in Africa are continuing to grow, something like 20% year on year. So this company, their software automates billing, customer management, analytics, and integrates into a company CRM so that they can kind of like step back and better understand and manage, churn and failed payments. We met these founders actually the way we meet almost all our other founders, which was through one of our portfolio companies who we'd already invested in South Africa, who said, actually, we're using them. You guys should take a look. So we're like, okay, well, one of our portfolio companies is a happy customer. That's pretty cool. That company is called Stitch. And so they made the original introduction. Scott and I never met the founders. We still have not because we haven't been to South Africa. But we were able to kind of triangulate because we actually have a large community of LPs that are in South Africa, get, some great background on them. And ultimately, we decided to invest really, I think, before anyone else. So it was a pre-seed round. I think it started off as being 750, got kind of scaled up, and we were there kind of at the earliest points of the journey. I'm proud of this investment because there's so many investments we could be doing in New York and LA and all these places, but we saw the spark that we look for, in these founders there, and so we leaned in, even though many folks thought we were kind of nuts. So they just so that was their pre-seed round, and then now they've just announced their seed round with a good kind of global fintech investor. So we're excited for their journey. Still very early; it's a seed stage company, but we're really proud of them for getting through.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great story and kind of just like hits on different points of everywhere. One, the global community giving you access to an opportunity in South Africa. Two, being able to use, portfolio company founders locally to, source. And then three, it sounds like using that global kind of everywhere network on the LP operator side to also diligence. And so it kind of speaks to, I think, everywhere in a great sense there. And I would have never thought that, 30% of digital payments were failing in anywhere in the world. And so I think, once again, being able to look at other geos where the pain points that may not exist in America are real there and solving that can create real value. And so love that story.
And then let's talk about resilient founders. I mean, goodness, they're in South Africa. The rand basically just tanked. I mean, the stuff that they're dealing with is just not the stuff that our founders in New York City are dealing with, like a whole different set of challenges. And that the fact that these folks, like, they're still at it, they just persevere. They, it seems like so much heaviness comes on them, and they're able to plug through. So love that characteristic of. We find that across emerging markets, as you can imagine. Like life in many of these places, just all the time, life is harder, and so kind of that chip on the shoulder is very personal there.
Yeah, and maybe switching gears, like many others, I follow on you on Twitter and find your tweets to be awesome, authentic, and love them. And so, how do you view Twitter/X, I guess, as a medium for brand building, getting connected with founders, LPs, et cetera? What does Twitter mean to you? Because I think you use it in a very, very unique and awesome fashion. Love to learn more about that.
Thank you. I mean, I don't have a huge following, but I'd say I have a very specific following. Like the only people that follow me are founders, and then obviously some VC friends. But it's not a wide, they're not like sports fans in like Minnesota who follow me. So that part's good because it's like I know my community. I think part of the reason I became more active on Twitter was I felt like there was a lot of bad information being shared with founders, and sometimes not even bad, but just not authentic, right? So, founders, it's tough. You're starting a company, you're focused on your product, and all you're reading is the TechCrunch highlights that are, basically telling you that everything's so great, this should be so easy, and founders are, like making millions of dollars within a few years. It's just not the reality for 99% of founders out there. Sure, there are some outliers that happens to. And so I like to talk about like, okay, here's the narrative that like the world is saying, and like, here's actually what I'm seeing on the ground. So Oftentimes that can be different, and I just like bringing that to light. And I'd say what's kind of happened maybe in the last few years is I get so many founders, even if they don't reach out or I get introduced by you, the first thing they'll say in the email is like, "Oh, hey Jenny, like I follow you on Twitter. Like I got something from that, or that was helpful in something." And so that to me is like the most rewarding thing. It's not really about building like a personal brand, because honestly, I get a lot of backlash too, and you have to be thick-skinned to be on social media. I get a lot of people send me crazy emails telling me, that I'm a whack job, but it's really, I love just like helping the founders. If I can like, shed light on something that for whatever reason they're not getting a clear answer on, or there's just not a lot of information on, that's very rewarding to me. So
Yeah. Well, I do love the content. Yeah. Please keep it up. And yeah, I think you're right. Look, anyone that's going to spend time on social media is going to have, thick skin and be brave, because there's always someone's going to complain about some shit. But I enjoy the
yeah.
content. So please keep it up. And yeah, to that point, and you had this tweet, I think it was like I don't know, a couple weeks ago, that I thought was really interesting. Forgive me for reading here, but I'm just going to make sure I get it right. It was, if you go up my track record, the less knowledge I had about an industry or vertical before investing, the more successful the outcome of that company was. And so just love to kind of, one, what prompted you to kind of look in the data there, I guess. And then two, what are your takeaways there from how you want to seek and invest into opportunities going forward?
Yeah, well, I gave the example of Alloy, so we can just, stick with that. So one of my first investments in fintech, I didn't even know what KYC, I don't think, stood for, right? And wasn't really familiar with how using APIs could help. It was like nothing I knew. But I met these founders, and there was that spark, right? They had a previous experience with a company that really informed where the world was going. I'd seen them like have go through a challenging co-founder dynamic in that old company. It was like all the things that you kind of look for. And so I think that what the tweet is really saying is that sometimes as early stage investors, we can be, you can be thesis driven, or you could be looking for a market or something like that. And at the earliest stages, you just have to focus on what's in front of you. And there's not much in front of you except people. And so can you kind of dissect, the people and the people characteristics? And sometimes I think if you know too much about an industry, you get distracted by, again, this is at the pre-seed. I know it's different at the Series A and B, but at the early stage, like you get distracted. Well, the market size isn't big enough, or, all of these barriers. Just look at the people. Can the people figure that out? Because it's going to change direction 10 times. Are they going to be able to get through? Right? Do they have this like big vision, or do they just want to build this little widget? So I really looked at the data. I mean, the other one is the crypto company, is a good example where everyone just said market size. And I was like, hey, you know what? Who knows what the market size is? But like this guy is going to figure it out, right? And so that company has become a huge company as well. So I think, the point of the tweet is like, just focus on the task at hand. And as pre-seed, it's really about like understanding who the people are and can they go the distance.
No, I agree. At the end of the day, people will overcome or fail with those challenges, and they have the unique insights to derive that market and the knowledge that will hopefully win the day. And so, yeah, I agree where you're focusing your time, and just love that point, because it forces other folks to think about, hey, where do I actually invest best at, and reevaluate ourselves.
I know. Well, when early stage investors are just so hung up on, thesis and all this stuff, like I admire it to one extent because I love like the intellectual rigor of it. And that like you've thought about it that much, but I just, most of my companies pivot, right? Or they, go another direction, or they, they test something and it turns out it wasn't true. So I just can't spend, as much time on that. So.
Yeah, and I guess just thinking about like more of those learnings, how has everywhere evolved outside of, the rebrand from the fund?
How has it evolved? Well, we are slightly bigger now, so we are able to write a little bit larger checks, which is nice. We have this kind of distributed venture partner, which kind of structure, which has gone through a few iterations. So we're always learning there on how best to kind of engage our community. and figure that out. So there've been some, some ups and downs on that, figuring out. I mean, I think, the cool thing about Scott and I is that like we just love kind of iterating and tweaking the model and like doing this really fun work. And so it's funny, like when bigger LPs, just talk to us, even though that's not really who our LPs are, and they're like, okay, well, tell us what the fund, the firm's going to look like in 10 years. We know the answer that they want to hear, right? Like we're not dumb, like we know what they want to hear, but we tell them the truth, which is we actually don't know. We want to keep on, iterating, creating a better product, responding to the market conditions, right? And providing value for our founders. And that's just going to change. So to say that we know what, our number 10 fund's going to look like or whatever number that is just not true for us. We want to always be trying new things, and we are. Like we have kind of tried a few structures, and we're always working on new products and new new platforms. So
Yeah, perfect there. And then I guess maybe just one final, just more like, fun question. I was chatting with a friend of yours who will be left unnamed, that you start your mornings by standing on your head. Like, one, is this true? And two, can you kind of just tell us more about this unique practice, what inspired you to incorporate it and in your daily routine, and what benefits it's kind of you derive from it?
oh, it's an old practice actually. So most people don't know this, but I got certified as a yoga teacher many years ago. So I went to India. I stayed there for about 8 months, traveling, and then also studying with a yoga guru, as they call them, and really got in it for the kind of meditative purposes. So it's actually a very active yoga practice, but the whole idea is that, exhaust the body, quiet the mind. And so I've always been someone, I love to run, I love to exercise, all these things, but really what it does is it allows me to meditate. I'm not someone who can, sit on a brick or whatever on a pillow and get there. I have to do it by distracting myself and clearing my mind in another way. So the headstanding, I started a really long time ago with the same way of like, okay, it takes a lot of concentration to do that. And while I'm concentrating, I'm not thinking about the 100 things on my to-do list, like, all the other things that, that can distract you. I'm actually just thinking about keeping my legs in the air, not falling over, breathing, all these things. So I find it's a really good way to start the day. But like, I'm not some weird, like, cold plunge person or like, intermittent fasting or whatnot. Like for me, it's about just like a meditative way to like start the day with clarity. I don't know if there's any health benefits, but it definitely works for me.
Nice. No, love hearing these nuances of what, works for other people. Actually, I'm not like a cold plunge like avid user, but I've done it a couple times and really enjoyed it. And so maybe I'll have to insert that into my daily routine to kind of compete with you there.
There you go. So do the cold plunge, get out, and then stand on your head. And I mean, Rich, like
Life
you're
changing.
golden.
Oh man. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for sharing the global impact that, you and Scott are making with Everywhere. It's been great hearing the Everywhere story.
Thanks so much for having me. So fun.
Take care, Jenny.